January of 2025, the President of the United States stood in front of the country and promised a shield. Not a metaphor, not a slogan for a press release. An actual, physical shield in the sky, built to stop missiles before they could ever reach American soil. Nearly impenetrable, he said. Operational within 3 years. Total cost, $175 billion. 18 months later, the people actually responsible for building that shield sat in front of Congress and admitted something very different. The price tag wasn't $175 billion anymore. It had crossed $1 trillion. Some independent estimates put it closer to $1.2 trillion, and even after spending more money than the entire history of the Apollo program multiplied roughly 100 times over, the system being designed still wouldn't stop most of what an enemy could throw at it. Just a handful of missiles, maybe 10, out of however many actually got launched. Somewhere between that press conference and that budget hearing, something happened. A promise that sounded simple enough to fit on a campaign poster ran straight into a problem that has haunted every government on Earth that has ever tried to build a wall against the sky. You cannot spend your way out of physics. You can only get closer to it. More expensively, $1 trillion at a time. And buried inside that failure is something far more interesting than a missile shield. A frozen island nobody was thinking about a year ago. A billionaire who now sits closer to the center of American national security than almost anyone outside government. And a pattern in how promises like this get made, get funded, and get almost impossible to stop. A pattern that has nothing to do with missiles at all, and everything to do with how trillion-dollar decisions actually get made in this country. This is the story of that shield. Not what it promises to do, what it actually costs to try, and who exactly is getting paid while the public argues about the headline number. To understand why a missile shield costs this much, you need to understand one piece of math that every defense official in this story keeps tiptoeing around in public. It is always, always cheaper to attack than it is to defend. A single intercontinental ballistic missile costs tens of millions of dollars to build. The system designed to shoot it down costs vastly more, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes billions, depending on how far out you're trying to catch it. That gap isn't an accident of bad engineering or a problem that better technology eventually solves. It is one of the oldest rules in the physics of warfare, and in the entire history of military competition between nations, it has never once been permanently broken. Here's why. A missile in flight moves through 3 distinct phases, and each one creates a completely different problem for anyone trying to stop it. The first is the boost phase, the few minutes right after launch, when the missile is still climbing out of the atmosphere on a column of fire, slow by missile standards, and burning hot enough to be seen by infrared sensors from hundreds of miles away. The second is the mid-course phase, when the missile is coasting silently through the vacuum of space, sometimes for 20 minutes or more, completely unpowered, simply following the arc that physics has already determined for it. And the third is the terminal phase, the final descent back into the atmosphere, when the warhead is moving at several kilometers per second, and the entire window to do anything about it closes in under a minute. Each phase looks, on paper, like the right moment to strike. In practice, each one comes with a trap built into it. Boost phase is the easiest moment to physically hit something, because the missile is slow and has nowhere to hide. But it is also the hardest moment to actually be there for, because you need a weapon already positioned exactly where the launch happens, before anyone on Earth knows it's coming. You cannot scramble an interceptor across an ocean in 90 seconds. You either have something waiting in that exact patch of sky already, or you don't get a boost phase shot at all. Mid-course looks more forgiving. because you have minutes instead of seconds. But that extra time is exactly what a country trying to overwhelm a defense system will use against you. Modern ballistic missiles can release decoys during mid-course, objects built to mimic the radar signature and the heat signature of the real warhead closely enough that a defense system has to treat every single one as a potential threat. Some of these decoys are sophisticated, designed and tested specifically to fool a particular radar system. Others are almost absurdly simple: pieces of metal, foil, debris. Anything that creates enough clutter to make discrimination difficult. Either way, every decoy you cannot immediately rule out forces you to either ignore a potential warhead or waste an expensive interceptor chasing something that was never going to hurt anyone. Attackers know this. It's why saturating mid-course with cheap clutter is one of the oldest tricks in the missile playbook. It doesn't have to fool the system forever. It only has to make the system spend itself broke, trying to find the real threat. And then there's terminal phase, the moment almost everyone pictures when they imagine a missile defense system actually working. A streak of light meeting a streak of light in the night sky. In reality, terminal phase is the worst possible place to try this. By the time a warhead reaches its final descent, it's moving faster than a rifle bullet, and an interceptor has to detect it, calculate a collision course, launch, and physically strike an object the size of a refrigerator, all inside a window measured in seconds, not minutes. Anything that goes wrong in that sequence, a software delay, a tracking error of even a fraction of a second, a slightly maneuvering target, and the intercept simply doesn't happen. There is no second attempt. The missile has already arrived. Now take that three-phase problem and multiply it by scale, because scale is where this entire story actually lives. A small country defending a small, dense footprint of territory against a limited, relatively unsophisticated set of threats can build a system that mostly works. Israel's layered network of interceptors has done exactly that for well over a decade, against rockets that often cost only a few $100s apiece to build, fired from a few dozen kilometers away, inside a country small enough that every major population center sits within range of multiple overlapping defense batteries. The country making this new promise is not small. It spans an entire continent, and the threats it claims to be defending against are not homemade rockets traveling a few kilometers. They're intercontinental weapons capable of being launched from the other side of the planet, potentially in numbers no one can predict in advance, potentially in coordinated waves designed for the sole purpose of making the defense spend itself into the ground before the real warhead ever arrives. Some adversary nations have spent decades developing exactly that doctrine, overwhelming a defense system not through superior technology, but through sheer numbers and cheap countermeasures, betting that no defense budget on Earth can keep pace with that math forever. This is the arithmetic that never made it into the campaign promise to reliably intercept even a modest, deliberate, coordinated attack. Not history's worst-case scenario, just a determined adversary doing exactly what defense planners already know they're capable of. You don't need a handful of interceptors stationed at a few bases. You need thousands of them, positioned everywhere, all the time, ready to react inside a window measured in seconds. And the moment you decide those interceptors need to live in orbit instead of on the ground, which is the only way to guarantee boost phase coverage anywhere on the planet, each one costs roughly as much as a small satellite. Except this satellite has a lifespan of about 5 years before atmospheric drag pulls it back down and burns it up, and it has to be replaced indefinitely, on a loop, for as long as the shield is supposed to exist. That is not a one-time defense budget. That is a subscription service with no cancellation option, priced in the tens of billions of dollars a year, forever. And it is the actual mechanical reason the number attached to this program did not simply go up once. It went up and up and up again. Every single time someone outside the Pentagon asked to see the real architecture instead of the press release. This is not the first time an American president has stood in front of the country and promised a shield in the sky. It's the second. And the way the first one ended tells you almost everything about how the second one is likely to go. On March 23, 1983, Ronald Reagan went on national television and announced something he called the Strategic Defense Initiative, a network of space-based and ground-based systems designed to detect and destroy Soviet nuclear missiles before they could ever reach the United States. Reagan framed it, sincerely, as a way out of the nuclear standoff that had defined the entire Cold War. A doctrine known as mutually assured destruction, where neither superpower would launch a first strike because both knew the other could annihilate them in return. Reagan's idea was to break that doctrine entirely. Instead of deterring an attack with the threat of retaliation, the United States would simply shoot the missiles down before they arrived, rendering nuclear weapons, in his own words, impotent and obsolete. The press immediately gave it a nickname that stuck for the rest of its existence: Star Wars. And almost from the moment Reagan finished speaking, the program became one of the most contested pieces of technology policy in American history. Members of his own administration hadn't been warned the announcement was coming. The Secretary of State reportedly found out about it the same way the rest of the country did, by watching it on television. Scientific bodies, including the American Physical Society, would later conclude that the core technologies involved were decades away from being credible, and that an entire additional decade of research would be needed just to determine whether the system was physically possible at all. One of the specific proposals that came out of this program, late in its life, was called Brilliant Pebbles. The concept was elegant on paper. Thousands of small, autonomous kill vehicles scattered across low Earth orbit, each one a self-contained interceptor sealed inside a protective shell, waiting silently for a launch, ready to detect a missile and physically collide with it during the few vulnerable minutes of its boost phase. Strip away the decades and the Cold War branding, and that is, in almost every meaningful way, the same architecture being discussed for this program today. Same orbit, same boost phase logic, same fundamental bet that enough small, cheap satellites could solve a problem that a handful of large, expensive interceptors never could. Brilliant Pebbles never flew. Not one operational unit. The program consumed billions of dollars in research across multiple administrations and was quietly canceled in the 1990s, for reasons that should sound familiar by now. The projected cost of building, launching, and continuously replacing thousands of orbital interceptors had become a number that Congress was no longer willing to keep approving, especially once the single most urgent justification for the entire program, a sudden Soviet first strike, stopped being the most urgent threat the country actually faced. But there's a second layer to the Reagan story that rarely makes it into the popular version, and it matters enormously here. Some of the people who designed STI never fully believed the shield itself needed to work perfectly to succeed. Declassified assessments from the period reveal that American officials understood the program as something close to an economic weapon, a way of forcing the Soviet Union into an arms race it could not financially survive. The Soviet economy was already straining under the weight of decades of military spending. If the United States could convince Moscow that it was on the verge of a technological breakthrough that would neutralize the entire Soviet nuclear arsenal, the Kremlin would have no rational choice but to pour its own dwindling resources into matching it: countermeasures, faster missiles, anti-satellite weapons, anything to keep pace. Whether the American shield ever actually worked was almost secondary. The threat of it working was enough to bend an adversary's budget into the ground. It's a deeply uncomfortable possibility, and historians still debate how much of Stye's true purpose was genuine defense versus genuine economic warfare. But the documented outcome lines up with the theory unsettlingly well. The Soviet leadership treated Stye as an existential financial threat, pushed hard in arms control talks to have it banned outright, and ultimately found itself negotiating from a position of economic desperation that historians now consider one of the meaningful pressures accelerating the Soviet collapse just a few years later. What's different this time isn't the physics. The physics hasn't changed even slightly since 1983. What's changed is the cost of getting something into orbit in the first place. In Reagan's era, launching a single kilogram of payload into low Earth orbit cost tens of thousands of dollars. A number that alone made a constellation of thousands of satellites almost impossible to justify, no matter how sound the strategic logic behind it. Today, that cost has fallen by a factor of 10 or more, driven almost entirely by reusable rocket technology that simply did not exist when brilliant Pebbles was on the drawing board. One private company alone now operates more than 10,000 satellites in orbit, proof to the people defending this program that a constellation at this scale isn't theoretical anymore. It's already been built, just for a different purpose. So the argument being made today is not actually a new argument. It is the same argument from 1983, run through tooling that finally makes the math less impossible. The people defending this program will tell you that's exactly why it deserves a second chance. The one obstacle that killed it the first time, launch cost, has genuinely been solved. The people skeptical of it will tell you that cheaper rockets only ever addressed one part of a three-part problem, and that the other two parts, the underlying physics of hitting a fast-moving target in a matter of seconds, and the recurring bill for replacing thousands of satellites on a 5-year cycle, forever, were never about rocket prices to begin with. Both of those things can be true at the same time. And whichever one turns out to matter more, there is one detail from the Reagan story that should sit uncomfortably with anyone watching this program unfold in real time. The last time an American president made this exact promise, the country spent billions of dollars and the better part of a decade chasing it, and never once managed to build the thing he described on television. If you want to know whether a trillion-dollar promise is actually real, you stop listening to the press conference, and you start listening to the people who are legally required to account for the money. In testimony before Congress, the general put in charge of running this program said something that should have made far more headlines than it did. He told lawmakers plainly that if the most ambitious piece of this system, the space-based interceptors, the direct technical descendant of brilliant Pebbles, couldn't be built affordably, his office simply would not move it into production. Sit with that for a second. The man personally responsible for delivering this shield is on the public record saying its centerpiece, the entire reason the program needed to exist in the first place, might not happen. Not because the threat isn't real, not because the technology is impossible, because the bill doesn't close. That single admission matters because of what it reveals underneath it. Nobody actually working on this program, not the general, not the Pentagon, not the independent analysts hired specifically to estimate its cost, currently agrees on what the finished system is even supposed to look like. The White House's original number assumed one version of the architecture, sized to stop a limited threat from a smaller, less sophisticated adversary. The Congressional Budget Office's trillion-dollar estimate assumed a far more demanding version, built to survive a coordinated attack from a major military power. A separate think tank estimate landed somewhere in between those two. These are not small differences in accounting. They are entirely different systems with entirely different price tags, all being discussed in public under the exact same three-word name, as if everyone were describing the same plan. And it gets stranger. The director of the program has publicly pushed back on the trillion-dollar congressional estimate, arguing it doesn't reflect the architecture actually being developed, without releasing the actual architecture being developed for anyone to check that claim against. Lawmakers from both parties have said openly that they don't have the technical detail required to evaluate what they're funding or to perform any meaningful oversight of the program at all. One senator on the relevant committee put it almost exactly this way: there's something deeply unusual about committing $25 billion to a program before anyone has a clear sense of how it's supposed to be built. And it isn't just one senator's complaint sitting quietly in a hearing transcript. A formal report attached to the most recent defense spending bill states, in writing, that the subcommittees responsible for this money were unable to effectively assess the resources available or conduct oversight of the program due to what the report calls insufficient budgetary information. Read that sentence slowly. The people constitutionally responsible for approving how this money gets spent told the public, on paper, that they could not tell what they were approving. And they approved it anyway. Tens of billions of dollars committed, with the underlying architecture still officially undefined. This is not fundamentally a story about incompetence. It's a story about how one specific category of government spending, anything labeled national security, anything framed as urgent and existential, gets treated differently than almost every other line in the federal budget. Ask Congress for this much money to rebuild a bridge, modernize a hospital system, or fund a climate program, and you will spend years justifying every individual dollar in public hearings against competing priorities under constant scrutiny. Ask for it under the banner of defending the homeland from missiles, and the first $25 billion can move before anyone outside a closed-door briefing has seen a finished blueprint. That pattern, fund first, design later, question never, is not new, and it is not unique to this particular program. It is one of the oldest mechanics in the defense budget, and it works almost every single time for one simple human reason that has nothing to do with engineering. No elected official wants to be remembered as the person who voted against protecting the country, even when, for the moment, protecting the country is still mostly a number on a slide and a promise on a podium. And once that first tranche of money moves, something else happens that almost never gets discussed in the press coverage. The program stops being just an idea that Congress can simply decide to abandon. It becomes contracts. It becomes jobs in specific congressional districts. It becomes companies that have already hired engineers, leased facilities, and built supply chains around the assumption that the money keeps flowing. Canceling a program at that stage doesn't just mean admitting a mistake. It means actively destroying jobs and breaking contracts that real people and real companies are now depending on. Which is precisely why, historically, these programs almost never get canceled outright. They get redesigned, rebranded, slowed down, or quietly scaled back. They essentially never simply disappear. Here is where this story stops being about budgets and starts being about an island most Americans couldn't find on a map. In January of 2026, the president said something in an interview that quietly connected two stories almost everyone had been following separately. Asked about a new framework agreement involving Greenland, he said the arrangement included two distinct parts. The first was mineral rights. The second, in his own words, was this missile shield. Not as a metaphor, not as an analyst's theory stitched together after the fact. The President of the United States said, on camera, that this missile defense program and access to a foreign territory's natural resources were now part of the same negotiation. To understand why those two things ended up in the same sentence, you need one piece of context that almost never makes it into the news coverage. The interceptors this shield depends on, the radar systems tracking incoming threats, and the heat-resistant ceramics that let a hypersonic vehicle survive re-entering the atmosphere without disintegrating. All of it requires a specific, narrow category of material known as heavy rare earth elements. These aren't exotic in the sense of being scarce in the ground. They're exotic in the sense of being almost impossible to refine into a usable form outside of one country's industrial capacity. Right now, that one country controls roughly 90% of the world's processing capability for these materials. It is not the United States. Greenland happens to sit on top of one of the largest untapped deposits of exactly these materials anywhere on the planet. Two sites in particular, known to geologists for decades, contain reserves large enough to meaningfully shift where the Western world sources its heavy rare earths for the next several decades. An American-backed mining company has spent the past 2 years securing development rights to one of them. And the U.S. Export-Import Bank has already extended financing toward getting it operational. Separately, the Pentagon has struck its own direct partnerships with rare earth producers, taking equity stakes and off-take agreements specifically designed to build a supply chain that never has to run through the one country currently dominating the market. And Greenland matters for an entirely separate reason that has nothing to do with what's buried in its ground. Its position in the high Arctic makes it one of the only places on Earth capable of maintaining a reliable, continuous communications link with every orbital plane in a satellite constellation circling the globe. Engineers studying the proposed shield's architecture have noted that a base in this exact region functions as a critical bridge, one of the very few locations on the planet that can talk to every satellite in the network, regardless of which direction it's currently flying. The same polar desert conditions that make the region brutally difficult to live in also make it almost perfect for the kind of laser and high-frequency communication links a space-based shield would depend on, because there's almost no moisture in the air to interfere with the signal. So look at what's actually sitting underneath one island. The raw material the shield needs to be built. The unique geography the shield needs to function reliably once it exists, both physically located on the same frozen landmass, both folded into the exact same negotiation openly by the president himself on camera months ago. That is not a coincidence buried somewhere in an unrelated news cycle. That is what the actual machinery behind $1 trillion promise looks like, once you follow the money far enough to see precisely where it lands. It also explains a wave of interest that otherwise looks strange in isolation. A number of the wealthiest individuals in the world quietly increasing their investments in Greenlandic mining ventures over the past year, well before most of the public understood why the island had suddenly become strategically important. When billionaires move money toward a frozen, sparsely populated territory at the same moment a government is negotiating mineral rights there as part of a defense program, that isn't intuition. That's people with access to information the rest of the country doesn't have yet, positioning themselves early. None of this requires believing in a conspiracy. It only requires noticing that the same handful of resources, rare minerals, strategic geography, defense contracts, keep showing up clustered together in the hands of the same small group of people and companies. Every single time a number this large starts moving through the federal government. The missile shield is the headline. The island underneath it is the part of the story almost nobody outside specialist circles was paying attention to, until the president said the two were the same deal. There is one company that shows up again and again at almost every layer of this program, and understanding how it got there tells you something important about how modern American defense spending actually works. In the space of about 4 days in the spring of 2026, a single private company was awarded more than $6 billion in contracts tied directly to this missile shield. One contract, worth over $4 billion on its own, covers a network of sensor satellites designed to detect and track ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and hypersonic weapons from orbit. Arguably the single most critical sensing layer the entire system depends on. A separate contract, worth more than $2 billion, covers something just as foundational. A secure, high-speed communications backbone built to relay targeting data between satellites, sensors, and interceptors in near real time. Without that backbone, even a perfectly designed interceptor is useless, because it never receives the data telling it where to go. That single company's combined Golden Dome contracts now exceed the prototype awards given to every other company in the entire program put together. The satellites doing this work are built on a platform called Starshield, a military-grade, classified variant of the same commercial technology that already operates the largest satellite internet network on Earth. The company didn't build a new constellation from scratch for this program. It adapted infrastructure it had already built for an entirely different purpose, at a scale no government agency could have replicated on its own in any reasonable time frame. And that, more than any single contract number, is the real reason this company became central to American missile defense in the first place. By the time this shield was even announced, one private company already operated more satellites in orbit than every other organization on the planet combined, government and commercial. When the Pentagon went looking for someone who could field a constellation at the size this program required, there was, practically speaking, only one company on Earth that already had the infrastructure built. But infrastructure isn't the only thing connecting this company to the program. The relationships run deeper, and they run through people, not just hardware. One of the officials who helped establish the government agency now responsible for procuring much of this shield's space architecture has a personal history with this company's founder that goes back more than 2 decades. Including, according to public reporting, a trip the two of them took together to study foreign missile technology, years before that company existed in any meaningful form. That same official later steered billions of dollars in early government contracts toward the founder's new venture, at a time when almost no one in the aerospace industry believed it would survive. A separate 4-star general, formerly responsible for homeland missile defense at the highest level of the U.S. military, now reports directly to that same founder inside the company itself. None of this is illegal, and none of it is hidden. It's documented in public reporting, contract filings, and testimony. But it is worth sitting with, because it describes something specific: a small, overlapping network of people who have spent decades moving between government missile defense roles and a single private company, now finding themselves on both sides of the largest defense contract in American history at the same time. Some of those same officials have also taken on advisory roles at smaller startups, working on the next generation of strike weapons, meaning the people shaping how this country builds its defense are, in several documented cases, also positioned to benefit financially from how that defense gets built. Even the company's own public financial disclosures add another layer worth pausing on. As part of becoming a publicly traded company, it was required to disclose its finances in detail for the first time, revealing billions of dollars in revenue, but also a significant net loss, with the specific financial terms of its military satellite work kept classified and redacted even within that public filing. Around the same time, investigative reporting surfaced something that drew immediate national security scrutiny. Investors with ties to foreign military contractors had quietly acquired financial stakes in the company, the exact same company that now operates the sensing and communications backbone underneath the United States' most sensitive missile defense infrastructure. Put all of that together, and you get a picture that has nothing to do with whether the technology works. One company is now so deeply embedded in this program, through contracts, through infrastructure, through personal relationships built over 20 years, and now through its own capital structure, that it has become difficult to determine where the government's missile shield ends and one company's commercial empire begins. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's simply what happens when a government decides the fastest way to build something this large, this fast, is to rent the infrastructure from the one private entity already capable of building it at scale, and then discovers, too late to easily reverse course, just how much leverage that arrangement quietly hands over. At this point, it would be easy to conclude this entire program is simply a waste, an expensive, half-built shield, captured by one company, justified by numbers nobody can agree on. The evidence so far supports that read. But the people defending this program aren't wrong about everything, and their strongest arguments deserve to be taken seriously before deciding what to think. The most serious case for building this shield doesn't rest on the claim that it will ever be perfect. Nobody credible is making that claim anymore. Not after the man running the program told Congress, on the record, that its most ambitious piece might never get built at all. The strongest case rests on a different idea entirely. Deterrence doesn't require a perfect shield. It only requires making an attack expensive and uncertain enough that an adversary's leadership decides the gamble isn't worth taking. Under that logic, a system that reliably stops even a modest fraction of an incoming attack still changes the calculation for anyone planning one, because no one on the other side knows, in advance, exactly which missiles will get through and which ones won't. Some defense analysts argue that uncertainty itself is the entire point, and that judging a program like this purely by its interception percentage misses what it's actually designed to do to an adversary's decision-making, long before a single missile is ever launched. There's a second argument worth taking seriously, too, and it has nothing to do with optimism about budgets. The threat landscape genuinely has changed since the last time an American president tried this. Hypersonic glide vehicles, weapons that maneuver unpredictably inside the atmosphere at many times the speed of sound, specifically designed to defeat older, predictable trajectory defense systems, barely existed as an operational threat in the 1980s. They exist now, fielded by more than one country capable of reaching the American mainland. A defense architecture built entirely around Cold War assumptions, optimized only for predictable ballistic arcs, genuinely would be obsolete against that kind of threat today. Updating that architecture for a different era of weapons isn't paranoia. It's the same basic logic every major military power applies to every category of its arsenal, on a rolling basis, every single decade. Now, the other side. The strongest argument against this program isn't that the threat is fake. It's that the proposed solution may be structurally incapable of solving the actual threat. No matter how much money gets poured into it, the Congressional Budget Office's own analysis found that even its largest, most expensive version of this architecture, the one approaching $750 billion for the orbital interceptor layer alone, would only be sized to stop a small handful of missiles in a single coordinated attack. Against a smaller, less sophisticated adversary working with a limited arsenal, that might genuinely be enough to matter. Against a major military power fielding hundreds of warheads, alongside exactly the kind of decoy saturation tactics this entire video has walked through, independent analysts argue it almost certainly would not be. One federal budget analyst summarized the core problem bluntly. A leaky shield defends the country about as well as buying every citizen a bulletproof vest, genuine protection against some threats, and an expensive illusion of protection against the one threat that would actually end the country as it currently exists. And there's a deeper problem that neither side of this argument fully escapes, no matter how the budget numbers eventually shake out. Even in the best-case scenario, where every dollar gets spent exactly as planned and every interceptor works exactly as designed, a system this expensive and this visible doesn't exist in a vacuum. Two of the world's other major military powers have already responded to this program's announcement by calling it provocative and destabilizing. And both nations possess the demonstrated capability to destroy satellites in orbit. Building a shield that depends on thousands of vulnerable objects circling the planet, in full public view of two adversaries who have stated outright that they consider it a threat to their own security, doesn't just risk failing to stop an attack someday. It risks giving those same adversaries a reason to test, in peacetime, whether they can disable pieces of the shield before it's ever actually needed. And a damaged satellite in low Earth orbit doesn't stay contained to the country that built it. The debris from a destroyed satellite becomes a hazard to every other object sharing that same orbital altitude, including the GPS, communications, and weather satellites that both sides, and frankly the entire world, depend on every single day. Both of these arguments are coherent. Both are held by serious people who have studied the same underlying numbers and arrived at very different conclusions about what those numbers actually mean. What almost nobody on either side of this debate seriously disputes anymore is the price tag itself. And that price tag, more than the underlying technology, is where this story is actually headed next. Strip away the satellites, the rare Earth deposits, and the trillion-dollar price tag for a moment, and you'll notice something. This story was never really about missiles at all. It's about a pattern that shows up almost everywhere a government spends an enormous amount of money on something framed as existential, urgent, and too important to question closely. It starts with a number small enough to say out loud on television in a single sentence. A promise simple enough to fit on a campaign poster. Then, the people actually responsible for building the thing spend a year, sometimes several years, discovering everything the first number never accounted for. The maintenance cycles, the replacement schedules, the parts of the system that weren't mentioned at the podium because they weren't flattering, and frankly, weren't finished yet. The number grows. Then, it grows again. By the time anyone outside a small circle of specialists fully understands the real scope of what's being built, billions of dollars have already moved. Contracts have already been signed. Companies have already hired engineers and leased facilities, and reversing course now costs almost as much, politically and financially, as simply continuing forward. So almost nobody ever does. You can trace this exact pattern across decades of American defense spending in the original cost projections for nuclear-powered submarines, in early estimates for stealth aircraft programs, in nearly every major weapons platform the Pentagon has fielded since the Second World War, each one justified at a number that bore little resemblance to what taxpayers actually ended up paying once the program matured. The specific technology changes every time. The underlying shape of the story almost never does. A program becomes too large, too entangled with private contractors, and too politically expensive to cancel, not necessarily because canceling it would be the wrong decision on the merits, but because canceling it would require some specific, named official to take public responsibility for the money already spent and the jobs already created across a dozen congressional districts. At that point, a program isn't being kept alive because the evidence says it works. It's being kept alive because killing it has become more politically costly than simply letting it keep growing. That is the real mechanism sitting underneath a shield in the sky. Not physics, not engineering. The simple, almost boring fact that once enough money starts moving through a system this large, the project develops a kind of gravity entirely of its own, pulling in more funding, more contractors, more political investment, regardless of whether the original promise was ever realistic to begin with. and regardless of whether anyone left in the room, still remembers what problem it was originally supposed to solve. If that pattern is something you want to understand better, how promises like this one actually get made, how they quietly grow past anyone's ability to stop them, and who specifically benefits, while the public argues about a single headline number, that is exactly the kind of mechanism this channel exists to take apart. One structure at a time. No agenda, just the signal. If that's useful to you, subscribing is what helps more of these get made. Now, back to the story. Because there's one more piece of this pattern still ahead, the part that determines whether any of this actually ends differently than it did the last time someone tried it. So where does this actually leave the country that was promised a shield? Somewhere between $175 billion and $1.2 trillion. Somewhere between a press conference confident enough to call the system nearly impenetrable and a closed-door budget hearing where the man running it admitted its most ambitious piece might never get built at all. Somewhere between a 40-year-old idea that failed once already, consumed billions of dollars, and never flew a single operational unit, and a launch industry finally cheap enough to make people believe, sincerely, that it might not fail the same way twice. And somewhere underneath all of it, a negotiation over a frozen island that has almost nothing to do with missiles on the surface, and almost everything to do with the rare materials those missiles are actually built from, and the one company now standing at nearly every layer of the system at once. None of that means the underlying threat is imaginary. Hypersonic weapons exist in active arsenals right now. The number of nations capable of striking the American mainland has grown over the last few decades, not shrunk. The case for taking that seriously is real, and dismissing it outright would be its own kind of mistake. The same kind of mistake is believing the number on a podium without ever asking what it actually buys. But seriousness and honesty are not the same thing. And the most honest version of this story isn't the one where a shield quietly gets built and the country becomes safe. It's the one where a number gets repeated so many times, by so many people, in so many different contexts, that everyone gradually stops asking what it actually purchases. Until the only thing left that anyone can agree on is that it costs far more than anyone was originally told, and almost no one can say, with any real confidence, exactly who decided that was acceptable. That is usually how the largest, most consequential commitments in history actually get made. Not in one single dramatic decision that someone could have stopped with a single vote. In 1,000 small ones instead, each one slightly easier to approve than the last. Each one justified by the momentum of everything that came before it, until the total is simply too large for anyone left in the room to meaningfully reverse. By the time the public finally understands the full shape of what's been built, the only question left isn't whether it should exist anymore. It's whether anyone still remembers what it was originally supposed to cost in the first place. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the machinery sitting underneath the headline, not the headline itself, share it with 5 people who would actually sit through all of it. And if there's a number you've seen in the news recently that never quite added up, something that made you pause and think, wait, how is that even possible? Leave it in the comments below. That's usually exactly where the next one of these starts.